You're now listening to Sanity at the Movies, Poltergeist Edition. Yay!
Yay.
Boo! Am I doing a ghost sound or am I giving my opinion on the movie?
I think you're doing a ghost sound.
We'll find out. Folks, we thought we'd talk about Poltergeist because we've been ambling our way through. Well,
Let's just be honest. We're big Amblin fans.
We're big Amblin fans, and we were watching.
When in doubt, go Amblin.
When in doubt, go Amblin or go home. That's what we always say to each other. And we just watched the Indiana Jones films. And I'm Nathan, and you're Jake, by the way.
Yep, I'm Jake.
If there was any doubt of that fact, we thought we'd do Poltergeist, a movie that I remember from my childhood, but didn't really remember very well. But I knew it had that.
Movie I had never seen and felt some trepidation about seeing. I don't like horror movies. Never been a horror fan. Don't like doing anything that even vaguely feels like endorsing them.
Yeah.
So I had some trepidation about taking this one on.
I did too. I mean, I think it's no secret that I've enjoyed a lot of horror things in my time. I always have kind of a love-hate relationship with it for the purposes of these podcasts because I also don't want to endorse things that are wicked. On the other hand, I think we famously did an episode of The Booking on Stephen King where we talked about how bad he was. And then like everybody was like, so Nathan, you really like Stephen King, huh?
Yeah.
It was like, okay, I should just be honest on the podcast about what I like and don't like and talk honestly and hopefully maturely about what I endorse, the good and the bad of these things. Not that we're going to be doing our hot take on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre anytime soon, but Poltergeist, I thought was worth doing, and we can talk about. We'll decide in this episode whether it actually ultimately was, but it's a pretty interesting movie. Right in that sweet spot of when Spielberg was firing on all cylinders and had something to say. And this movie came out like within weeks of E.T. Spielberg famously wanted to direct both. There was some kind of a proviso in the Directors Guild rules or whatever that you can't do that. And so he hired Tobe Hooper, who was famous for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, to direct Poltergeist. Spielberg wrote the script for this, cast the actors, he edited it. He oversaw the special effects. He would go back and forth between this and E.T. You can find interviews. I saw an interview with him where he's at the time saying like, yeah, every time I needed to recharge my batteries on E.T., I went to work on Poltergeist. And every time I needed to recharge my batteries on Poltergeist, I went and worked on E.T. I don't know. What's interesting, I guess this is just a Steven Spielberg movie. That's the easiest way to say it. Whether there's been a lot of controversy. Actually, at the time, Tobe Hooper, the Directors Guild decided to investigate because they'd heard so many things that it sounded like Spielberg just probably should have a co-director credit. And so Spielberg took out an ad in Variety and wrote an open letter to Tobe Hooper thanking him for the great job that he'd done directing Poltergeist and trying to put this whole thing to rest. But everybody kind of thinks
Spielberg actually directed it.
And some of the, like Zelda Rubinstein, who plays the little medium lady, she went on record saying, Tobe Hooper, he couldn't direct Traffic. He was sitting back there every day I came on set. Steve was there. Steve told me what to do. He worked with the actors. Steven Spielberg found Carol Ann, whatever that girl's name is. Heather O'Rourke, I think, worked with her. Every story, every anecdote that you hear about this, it's about like Spielberg had to step in and do this, or Spielberg said that I should do this way. Tobe Hooper probably can direct Traffic. I mean, and he probably did direct Traffic, but this is creatively and in many ways just logistically and technically.
This is Spielberg joint.
This is a Spielberg movie.
Yeah.
And it's pretty fascinating to realize this came out within, this was directed, conceived, and done in the same period as E.T., came out within a week or two of E.T., that summer of 82, is very much the id of where E.T. says suburban life under Reagan might work out if we can just find a cute creature from space. Poltergeist is just like, let's blow it to bits. Where E.T. ends with Elliot waving goodbye to his friends. This movie has a fake ending where the family's kind of happy and they've conquered the problem. And then the real ending is their house has been swallowed up and the bad guy's gotten away with it and they're just completely demoralized. Yeah. Their shoulders sagging as they walk into that hotel and throw out their TV, the symbol of whatever it was, the symbol of corporate 80s America. I don't know, the symbols of the capitalist. So those are the reasons why I thought this would be an interesting movie to talk about. A, because it's really just a Steven Spielberg movie, and we've been talking a lot about him this year with the Indiana Jones movies, and it's from that same time period. This would have been after Raiders, right before Temple of Doom.
Yeah.
This would have been part of the same fight that led up to the Temple of Doom PG-13 rating. I think that they got rated R for this one for really obvious reasons.
No, it's PG.
And then they appealed it.
Okay. I'm sorry. I misunderstood where you're going.
Yeah, the MPAA gave it an R, rightfully so, I think, because based on that stupid bathroom scene alone, this deserves an R rating.
Yep.
The bathroom scene, to my mind, is worse than anything in Raiders of the Lost Ark or...
Yeah, it's worse.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty gross. But they appealed it, and I don't know if they had to cut that scene down or not, but there's still a lot of that scene in there, and they got it down to PG, and Spielberg said, hey, it's parental guidance. Don't send your kids. And then nobody was happy with that. So
yeah,
within a couple of years, he'd done it again with Temple of Doom and Gremlins, and then Spielberg himself, to get out of hot water, called the MPAA president and said, hey, let's do
How about we have a middle of the road rating?
Yeah. Which is a good idea, I guess. I don't know. This isn't an episode about the rating system. The rating system is weird and politicized.
Very politicized, yeah.
Yeah.
Is what it is. I did think, I did have the thought when I saw this, I pulled it up on my Apple TV and it's like, oh, PG. And I thought, oh, I wonder, maybe this would be fun, for some of my older kids. And I thought, yeah, I'm not even going to try that.
Yeah, that was smart. That was a good thought. It is unfortunate though, because it is a pretty friendly movie all around until the point when it's not.
Exactly.
Like you could see that if not that we could maybe have a discussion about whether to ever show your kids any movies about the demonic, the supernatural, the ghost. If you were, there's lots of parts in this movie that are just kind of scary, but also it's a cartoon hand coming out of the TV. Oh no,
yeah,
whatever. But then when it wants to kind of earn its horror credentials in a few moments, it's like
it's over the top.
Yeah, it's overkill, and it kind of harshes the buzz of this movie, I would say. I don't know. What did you? I guess so. I've been establishing why I wanted to do it. It's a Spielberg movie. Mostly, it was interesting for that reason. Also, it's one I grew up with. It was an Amblin movie that you hadn't seen, and I think it really informs. I think. If we're going to talk about E.T. one of these days, if we're going to talk about Spielberg's Suburbia, if we're going to talk about all these kinds of things that are Steven Spielberg, it's a pretty interesting movie.
It's interesting. I don't know. Coming to it, having never seen it before and having no nostalgia for it and no special love of the genre, I felt very much like it never found its way under my skin. It never got in my head or in my heart. I just wasn't engaged with it the way that, if we put on E.T., I'm going to
be crying.
I'm going to be crying.
Yeah.
This movie had nothing inside me, and it never asked for much inside me.
Did it get you on its intended level? Were you ever scared?
No.
Yeah, it's really not a very scary movie.
It's not scary. It didn't, the idea of any of it never really, you can look at, okay, the effects are old and whatever. That's fine. But you can watch a movie with old effects and the idea of it gets under your skin.
Well, I also think you could watch a movie with no effects and the idea will really get under your skin.
Right. Well, I mean, I almost found it comical when we all of a sudden the tree's going to burst into the room and eat the boy, and there's going to be a cartoon tornado, and the girl's going to get drug into it didn't feel earned at that point to make those big leaps. And
no, the only way that works is for a children's movie, actually. If this was pitched at the Wizard of Oz crowd, I think, the tree actually can get you is a pretty neat twist.
Yeah. Well, the tree actually can get you is a really great idea. It just didn't really work.
I think that moment, it's just oh, okay, I guess this isn't a scary movie.
That's what it felt like.
When the first little cartoon, almost looks like the Disney animators from Mary Poppins did it, wispy hand thing comes out of the TV. It's just oh, well, you've already you've already shown me what's up your sleeve movie.
Yeah, and it's not very much.
And it's not much.
Yeah.
Like as long as Carol Ann's just looking in the TV and she says they're here and stuff, that's kind of creepy.
Right.
In and of itself. Like just the idea that something's come into our home and we don't know what it is. But we as an audience very quickly do know pretty much what we're dealing with. Yeah. And then all you've got is a light show and some grisly special effects later on.
Yeah. And even that, like, I didn't believe that they were going to leave dude. Like, I was not, like, surprised or relieved when it was just a vision. Mm-hmm. Like, it was just like, yeah, I don't think the tone of this movie, like, if they leave this way and they're going to come find his mangled, melted, clawed body, it would so break the tone of this movie. They've got to go back. This has to be a vision. Like, I had that thought in the moment. Like, so, okay, like if you're thinking that thought in the moment, then it doesn't actually work. It's not actually doing its job. It's just there to get your horror cred in. So
yeah, it's really cynical.
Yeah.
It is a thing that feels cynical about Spielberg around this time. It's the Temple of Doom heart scene. It's that kind of stuff. Yeah. It's just like, we need to do this because it's what we think people want. And so I don't know. Let's just dump on this movie real quick so we can talk about the virtues of it. I think it's a bad movie. I think the whole first act is slow and lame. I will just say very quickly, I love this movie probably, but not for anything that it does intentionally. I love the moment in history that it captures.
Well, you said earlier that this is just the flip side of E.T. It's the It. And I think that is the level on which you can really love and enjoy.
As a cultural artifact, I love this movie.
Yeah.
Both of Spielberg's career, of the 80s, of the era of my childhood. There's a lot of points of connection.
So maybe we just needed to talk about that before we dump on it.
I actually like dumping on it. Let's dump on it first because I don't think it'll actually take that long. It's slow.
I started, but then you were like, "No, let me defend it first." So I don't know which way are we going.
Sorry.
Could go either way.
Yeah, no. I just wanted to get my sort of
on the table
big take on the table.
Yeah.
So let's get back to the dumping now.
Yeah, and the movie is straight from the id, and as an artifact of the id of the time and of Spielberg and everything that represents, it's pretty special in and of itself.
We're going to spend a lot of time talking about subtext. The text is lame.
The text is lame. The subtext is worth talking about, then turning around and applying it to all of the dumb ripoffs. Mm-hmm. You know, Stranger Things needs to go and take a lesson from the school of the id.
Right.
But the movie itself, just as it's constructed, it's actually a pretty bad movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's slow. The first act is lame. It does some good stuff, just sort of setting up the ambiance.
Mm-hmm.
But outside of that,
even that, there's some weird missteps. Like the music is really sentimental at places where if it was more ominous.
And it was clearly a decision. It was like, we're going to lean into this, or we're leaning away from it, or leaning into it by leaning away. But yeah, just if you wanted me to be on edge or to be scared or to really feel like some tension, you broke it.
Right. And hypothetically, at least, you should be a soft touch because you don't watch this kind of stuff. So it should be able to get you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some people just aren't gettable by supernatural stuff.
I'm gettable.
Yeah, I'm pretty gettable when it comes. I'm actually especially gettable. This kind of thing is really scary to me when it's done.
The reason I think the reason I don't like this stuff is because I'm so gettable. Like,
right.
I don't think it's because it does nothing for me. I think it's because it does so much to me that
you feel used and it feels unpleasant.
Exactly right.
Yeah, I've certainly had those experiences where it's like, what? Who am I? Why? That wasn't enjoyable. I just paid money for someone to hit me over the side of the head and make me feel bad.
Apologies to the audience, but every time I've come out my entire life, every time I've come out of those movies, the word I always use is rape. Mm-hmm. That's how I feel.
You were assaulted by the filmmaker.
I was assaulted on a deep, emotional, spiritual level, violated and abused, and left dirty. That's how I feel coming out lots of these movies, and I don't like that feeling, and I avoid it.
Yeah, and I think that is the correct take. By the way, I have some nostalgia for certain artifacts for certain pieces of the genre, but there are movies that just cross a line, and I don't think that they should cross it. I mean, it turns out if you show the worst degradation, or if you conjure the demonic in a way that's palpable, that feels real, then it's pretty easy to play someone like a piano, but that's not a noble thing for an artist to aspire to.
Yeah. Get your power trip on. Go ahead, but now we know who you are.
Where the line is, we're not going to solve on this podcast, because a lot of things that we talk about, like the Indiana Jones series, are going to have those elements, and they'll be done very enjoyably and
to good effect. To pretend like the world is not a spiritual world, to pretend like the world doesn't have some crazy stuff going on in it, is to lie in its own way. Mm-hmm. And lots of movies are lying like that. So to have those kinds of elements in your movie is not a bad thing intrinsically.
Mm-hmm. That's what you want to do with them. It's your intention. I think there also is, it's something to be said about don't violate the bargain that you make with the audience. In other words, there are some movies, and I'm not defending them, but there are some movies that say, do you want to be in? Nobody goes into the Texas Chainsaw Massacre expecting to feel good at the end.
Right.
But there are movies, I think it's one of the problems with Temple of Doom, for example, that you didn't go in paying to be assaulted, but then there's that little section in the movie, at least, where
it takes you deep,
deeper than you wanted to go, into the demonic and into the visceral grue and gore of it all.
Yeah.
And that's unfair. That's not that's not why I bought my ticket.
No.
So, I can think of at least one, when you said you walked out feeling assaulted, I can think of a movie that I walked out of that I think the entire audience felt that way. You could say it was just because the filmmaker had done a better job than we expected him to, but it really did feel like we all went expecting to kind of be spooked and fun. Instead, we just had to sit there and process something very dark and something real. And I remember there was, the audience for these kinds of movies is always jocks and co-eds,
Yep.
Some guy who wants to have a lady clinging to his arm, and then
some girl that wants to cling to the big strong man's arm.
Let's not let the ladies off the hook. Yeah, exactly. And I remember she was in fact clinging to this guy's arm, but I don't think he was getting the result that he actually wanted, because she was traumatized and sad. And
it's going to be, you're not going to go
achieve the things that you were hoping
that
to.
It's not setting you up for that. It's setting you up for processing, daddy issues, our deepest mommy issues, deepest fears about children and babies, or whatever it was in the movie. It's generally what it comes down to, is processing the trauma of sex and death, one way or another.
Yeah. And if that's, this happens almost every year in the horror community, is something does that really well and it becomes a festival hit. Movies like Hereditary or the Wit of a Vitch, things that you've probably seen pop up on Netflix. They'll do that. They'll be very well made works of assault. And so some slick producer will pick them up and market them as kind of the next date horror movie.
And Final Destination, Scream.
The next Conjuring or Final, and then people will go see them, and they'll either...
I know what you did last summer.
Yeah, and there's two responses. If you find yourself in a movie like that, you can either let yourself be traumatized or you can check out completely. And so the people will say either that was the most horrific thing and I'm kind of offended by it, have the Jake response, or that was so boring and stupid and that was lame, man.
Yeah.
Those are kind of the only responses. There's truth in advertising, and I think that is one of the things Poltergeist actually gets wrong with its grisly scene. There is a version of this movie that's a pretty scary haunted house thriller. There's a version of this movie that's a pretty benign, what would it be like if a ghost came into my house, children's movie, almost like what you'd kind of actually expect if Steven Spielberg ghost movie to be.
Yeah.
This movie tries to split the difference, and that's one of its major flaws.
I think it shows you where Spielberg is going to tend to go wrong down the line. He really shouldn't try to split differences. He should just be fun. And you can be like, Jaws is fun. Like and he got it right with Jaws.
Jaws is an example of a very violent, suspenseful movie that makes, I think, a fair promise to the audience and then keeps it.
Delivers.
Yeah. This is going to be a really intense survivalist
You never
thriller.
feel betrayed while you're watching Jaws. You know what it's going to be, and then it just keeps delivering, and it delivers on the jump scares and everything else that you signed up for.
Right.
It just keeps delivering. E.T. delivers.
Right.
here's some scary horror tension, but actually it's a heartwarming, sweet movie.
Well, it's almost like where Spielberg goes wrong is anytime he tries to outthink himself. If he just gives in to his instincts are always good. I mean, he just wanted to tell the story of E.T. because it meant something to him, because his parents had gotten divorced, because he thought his dad was the bad guy, because he loved his mom, but didn't know how to process her grief, because, you know, he probably loved his dog or something. I don't know.
Right.
E.T. is just
all of that.
All of that. Poltergeist, I think, has some of that. It has some of that, I'm a young dad, I don't know how to love my family. I think some of the most affecting shots of the movie are when we cut to dad, and he's just like, what am I supposed to do with this? I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's what's great. If we just follow the arc of dad.
Yeah.
And mom too. It's like, okay, we got two hippies here.
Yeah.
Right? Like two hippies born in the 50s, parents in the 80s now. Yeah. Okay. Like,
and by the way, I thought it was just that they cast the actors young, but at a certain point they say he's asked his wife's age and he says 32, which means if she had, there's some, I think, nice subtext as to who these characters are. Like, they hooked up, they have a teenage daughter. They hooked up really early. They probably got pregnant out of wedlock.
Yeah.
They've gotten married. They've made a life for themselves. They've done the best they can.
They're trying to figure it out. They're still like going to be geeking out on the bed to some dumb TV shows on and smoking weed.
Yeah.
Like, you know.
But they, you know, she says, we've worked really hard for this. Like, they've achieved the yuppie dream. They've become these respectable middle class kind of people.
He's like the guy who's worked himself up in this company so much that he can take a week or two off of work, say that he's sick, and the boss is going to be like, oh crap, this means that he's looking for other jobs. Let me come and throw the bank at him. They're the flower children that are figuring it out.
Right.
Like, trying to do it right. Trying to be the good dad, trying to be the good mom, still like trying to be open-minded. Like, look, weird stuff's happening in this house. Remember that time, like when you were tripping acid, like, how open you were. Like, you got to get yourself back into that place. Now watch as this demon ghost is going to pull the chair across the floor and now pull our daughter across the floor. Like,
and that kind of battle between open-mindedness / old school toughness that we need is a theme through the entire movie. It's gonna, well,
and that's why, even when you come back to something like, and we're going to talk about this, I'm going to try to talk about it in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. You can't the only way to recapture Indiana Jones is to have an Indiana Jones that was born in the 80s and is trying to figure it out now.
Right.
The way that Indiana Jones was, you take Harrison Ford, and you know, you can go ahead and send him back in time, whatever, but he still has to carry the spirit of now.
Right.
That's what they got to go back and recapture. And why Kingdom of the Crystal Skull doesn't work, and why this next movie is not going to work, probably,
right,
unless they actually tap in to something.
Right. Like, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is actually a great example of for me to close the loop on the thing I was saying earlier, which is Steven Spielberg is really, when he tries to split the difference between what he calculates that his audience likes and what he's actually interested in.
Stop calculating.
Just stop calculating.
He's such a perfect, I've been using this word in like 1,000 different ways lately. He's such a perfect avatar of, like, what's the better word? What's the real word that I want? He's just like
he's a synthesis. The
magic. The reason he had the mojo, the magic, is because he was just tapped in. Like, he was the representative of the spirit of the age. Like, he felt it.
And there's a movie at the corner, we'll talk about this next time, but there's a movie at the corners of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull where he's just tapping into, I used to be that, where he's telling the story of old Indiana Jones, but he doesn't really feel like he can quite do that.
No, because he feels like he still needs to make Harrison Ford and Indiana Jones the hero of the story.
Right.
But the fact is, and that is where it's caught up. Like, it's like, he's not ready to pass the baton, doesn't want to pass the baton. And so he's going to take the hat at the end, and also, like, he's going to intentionally or subconsciously miscast the guy that he's going to hand the baton to. You know, it's just like...
Yeah, it's problematic.
It's problematic.
It doesn't work.
But this is not that discussion.
But I think I just wanted to close the loop on... Anytime Spielberg, Ready Player One's another great example, he's interested in the old guy who created the world. He does not care about these young people and their video game adventure, but he knows he kind of has to do that. And so that movie's really boring. You can tell when Spielberg's engaged. He's engaged when the old guy comes on, the guy that should have been played by Gene Wilder if Gene Wilder wasn't sick, whatever his name is.
If he had survived,
yeah.
It really should have been played by Gene Wilder, and that would have been awesome. Like, that would have changed the whole... Like, if Spielberg had Gene Wilder there, he might have actually been inspired to give us a good movie.
Yeah, he might have just went back and said, okay, how do I make the rest of this movie actually about something that I care about, because I've got Gene Wilder. But Crystal Skull, same thing. He's really interested in the scenes where Indiana Jones is sad and talking to his friend about the good old days. He really doesn't care about the Indiana Jones scenes. And so something like Last Crusade, which we just talked about, he finds a way to synthesize the two. One side of it does still feel a little bit cynical and formulaic, but at least he had enough of the magic back then that he could just kind of make it all work. But he's really interested in the dad stuff. Poltergeist is a great example of a movie that almost works in spite of itself because his instincts are so good as to be the audience avatar, or whatever word we want to use.
Yeah.
But all the calculated stuff is stupid.
Yeah. And I mean, there's just so many places where, because it's calculated, it really does break.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it just breaks.
Yeah.
And so we have the false ending, and then, come on.
We don't stay in this. There
is no way any family ever stays another night in that forsaken house.
Right. And they bend over backwards to try and make it work. We're going to have the medium lady say, this house is clean, or whatever. Yeah, and then we're going to have dad say, well, this is a really lame table setting. Like, I guess you can let the kids sleep if they have to. Nap, like, I'll be home really soon, though.
Yeah.
And what are you going to do about that gray stuff in your hair? Oh, I guess I'll dye it out and take a bath so that the kids can fall asleep and I can be in the absolute most vulnerable position when the monsters show back up.
Just so stupid.
It's really stupid.
It's just,
and really like we've gone past the ending.
I've got a point that I'm going to make, and so I'm going to break the reality of this film in order to make this point. And the point is, everything and everyone is terrible.
Yeah.
And it's like, but I don't begrudge him wanting to make that point. It's just like,
that point kind of is what makes the movie fun and makes the movie kind of rule. Actually.
Yeah, it's like, it is what makes that movie worth watching.
Yeah.
But why'd you have to break the movie to do that? There was a better way to do that.
Yeah, it's where Spielberg feels most cynical. It's like, I guess he made a movie that people liked, but he could have actually made a really great movie that people would still remember. He could have made a movie that Jake did grow up with, even though he doesn't like the genre.
Right.
Like, Spielberg was that good. He could have made the one ghost movie that we've all seen, whether we care, whether
he made the monster movies that I've seen. Like,
yeah, exactly. He made
Jaws, he made Jurassic Park. Like, I didn't watch monster movies. I watched those.
Yeah, Jake's not a big fan of like The Relic or other movies where monsters pop out and eat people, but he's seen the Steven Spielberg monsters pop out.
That's his job, is to be the, to take that, digest it, and give it to me in a way that,
here's your one UFO movie.
Exactly.
Here's your one.
That's what Spielberg's. That's what he does.
Here's your one adventurer movie. Really, I mean,
it's like James he just Bond sort of movie. Like, and it's not like it never feels like the suits are like, we need a Spielberg to digest this for everybody. It feels like, here's a guy who's like, hey, I want to do a UFO movie. Hey, I want to do a monster movie. Hey, dinosaurs, cool. Hey, like, whatever it is, like, the Explorer, cool. Like, you just sort of follow him around because he wants to touch all these places, and everywhere he touches, it feels like it's gold.
Well, to that point, 81 Raiders of the Lost Ark, 82 E.T., 82 Poltergeist, 84 Gremlins and Temple of Doom, 85 Goonies and Back to the Future. Yeah. What a run.
What a run.
This guy was King Midas. Like, everything this man touched,
it was gold.
I mean, I don't know, maybe the Beatles, like, has there been an entertainer in the 20th or 21st century who's had a bigger, better run? I mean, that's not even counting the stuff that came after that. After that, we're going to get into like The Color Purple, and he's going to start trying to grow up. He's not going to really successfully grow up.
But in film, who do you have? You've got like Hitchcock and Spielberg.
Yeah, and Hitchcock, maybe he did too. Hitchcock probably did like Vertigo, which wasn't a big hit. And then, if I remember correctly, like it would have been maybe Psycho and The Birds would have been the 1-2 punch.
In terms of just like...
You can name people that have done series, like the Marvel films or
people who've
Christopher Nolan's Batman
who've
movies.
Done arguably better work. Like you can pull the Scorseses and the whoever else you want to. But just in terms of like popular mass appeal, like mass impact, it's like that he's a public intellectual, which is to say he's a kind of intellectual that actually matters.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of just mass impact, there's Spielberg, there's everything after Spielberg. And the fact is, people are still making money off of Spielberg today. Like Stranger Things is just like tripping on Spielberg nostalgia.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even, let's try to be what Spielberg was. It's like, no, let's just try to recreate the same vibe that Spielberg gave us when we were kids for ourselves, not for even for a new generation. Like, this is that, I think maybe the Beatles is that comparison where it's just like, yeah, there are musicians out there that are like riffing and trying to do, but then there is a whole bunch of other people that are just like, let's just recreate the Beatles, man.
But I mean,
they won.
It is that level of just like, oh yeah, we'll take 5 years and we'll just change everything and make a ton of money. And you may not like us, you may like us, whatever. We're just going to build Mount Rushmore and put our faces on it and peace out.
Yeah. Yeah. And then,
there's only a handful of entertainers. I mean, the Beatles would be one of them that you could point to that
actually achieved that.
Actually did what Spielberg did in this glorious run.
Yeah. And this is the low light right here.
Yeah.
But it's part of the story.
This is the middle. I mean, it's actually pretty interesting to just take those 5 that I named or 6. You've got kind of a fun sandwich here. You've got like the bread is fun. The meat is Poltergeist.
Right.
So Raiders of the Lost Ark, one of the most fun, greatest movies of all time.
Yeah.
Then you've got E.T., also one of the greatest movies of all time.
Absolutely.
But maybe not Friday night, I'm going to put this on for fun like Raiders of the Lost Ark is. More like, oh, I want to be sad and nostalgic.
It's like you save it for October, maybe once a year at the most.
Yeah, it's like a gather around kids, we're going to dust off by E.T. again kind of.
Exactly.
But we don't just put this on like to pass the time.
it's a decision.
It's a special movie.
Yeah.
And then you got a really interesting 3-punch here. Poltergeist. I hate you, audience. I hate the people who made me popular. Gremlins. I hate you. in case there was any doubt what I actually thought about small town America and my mom and my dad, nostalgia and everything, I want to burn to the ground. And then Temple of Doom. Remember that fun thing? Actually, I hate you. And then Goonies, which is like, okay, we're going to take a breath. Maybe I like you, actually.
Yeah.
I remember. And then in many ways, the crowning jewel, and it's not primarily a movie that Spielberg conceived of, but it certainly has his touch on it, and it wouldn't have been made without his blessing and his influence, Back to the Future.
Yeah.
Which, in a weird way, takes the darkness and the light and combines them and says, I love you and I hate you.
We have brought balance to the Force.
It is a balance to the Force kind of thing. It's like the 50s sucked too, but also it was wonderful. Like,
and actually what I've discovered is everything is wonderful and everything is terrible, and I can be zen about it, and we can just have a good time together.
Mm-hmm.
And so you feel that with Back to the Future and the Back to the Future movies, and you feel that peace in Last Crusade when that comes around. And then he just settles into being Grandpa Spielberg after that. And then who cares? Yeah. The magic's gone because the tension is gone.
But Poltergeist is kind of
except Jurassic Park shows up and he's like, dinosaurs!
Yeah, I like dinosaurs! So I was listening to a thing on Back to the Future, and what they were pointing out is you can't make that movie now with our era. You can't make the Stranger Things of Back to the Future. I live in 2020 and I'm going to go back to 1980 because the culture fundamentally shifted between the 50s. Those are the two eras that you need. 50s and 80s is
now maybe in 2030.
Oh, sure. Yeah. After
whatever happens over the next 4 years happens.
After the world's been burned to the ground, then we can make a fun little movie about like going back to the time before this.
Yeah, so we can make a movie about the 2010s, jumping from the 2040s to the 2010s or something, or the early 2000s. That will be a movie that movies are still being made because we're not in the some Mad Maxian post-apocalyptic whatever. That'll be a movie that gets made. But
But Back to the Future, the joke of the movie, which only really works with those eras, is you have the innocent 1950s and you have the 80s, crass, corporate, Reagan, the 80s. Actually, people are
just people.
And
my dad was a peeping Tom, and my mom
always wanted to get it on, just like the girl that I want to take to the lake in my Jeep or whatever.
Yeah.
It was just as bad back then, but also it was different. I mean, it really is
there's just layers of hypocrisy and layers of social mores that you're trying to.
And I think
still people.
That's a very nice humanistic. I don't know if I buy it, but it's a nice humanistic fairy tale.
It's not exactly. I don't think it's exactly right, but
it's a nice story. Mm-hmm. And what I think Poltergeist is doing is giving us actually a more accurate version of this story, which is these people, these parents in this movie, they grew up just like Steven Spielberg, in the 1950s and then into the 60s. And like you said, they were flower children. But they grew up like dad was dad and mom was mom and John Wayne and apple pie. And the TV is literally going to end with the national anthem before it turns off and we can't watch any more TV because it's time for a good citizen to go to bed now.
Yeah.
Like that is the world that these people came out of. And now somehow they find themselves having to, in the 80s,
dealing with some kind of primal evil,
trying to be the parents, trying to be the respectable ones, trying to live up to that ideal. But they're both young and they're both play acting and they
feel inadequate and stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And they know it, but they're still going to try to get the job done.
And that's every scene. I mean, I agree with you. The beginning is boring, but that's a lot of what the beginning's doing.
It's trying to set that up, and it does a good job of setting that up.
Yeah, and it's every little thing, it's, oh crap, my daughter's thing died and I'm going to flush it down the toilet because I'm actually not the Leave It to Beaver mom. I'm just doing what I can to get by. But
why couldn't this thing have died while they were in school? And oh crap! Now I've got to do the thing where we put the Twizzler and the flower and the whatever and now we're gonna symbolically bury this dead parrot in the box, and the grave is going to be overturned by our desire to build the swimming pool in the backyard.
Yep. And the teenagers.
That's not symbolic.
The teenagers are going to be smirking in the background, not getting it like a good kid of an earlier era would have.
Yeah, and we're going to be, fighting over dinner or breakfast and throwing. And mom's just going to be sort of smiling and letting it happen while we fight.
Which is Spielberg must have hated dinner growing up, because every one of his suburban movies around this era has the scene where everybody's talking and the kids are saying things that they really shouldn't say. I mean, E.T. has a very famous one that I'm sure you can think of immediately, and most of our audience can't. I won't repeat it, but they're just being real and raw with each other, and meanwhile dad and mom are either oblivious or doing the best we can or smiling.
Yeah what feels like he hated was just that whole image of, hey, Mikey likes it, we're all just cheerfully having our breakfast before we go to, or having our, no, we're not going to have a dinner. There's going to be pizza and crap and the things that we say. And
dad's always going to fall asleep in front of TV. The constant image of this movie is dad in front of the TV.
Dad's it with a beer can,
conked out while primal forces try and steal his daughter.
Yep.
And then, the key scene, well, it's even, Carol Ann, she's intentionally cast as this angelic little Victorian ghost story. You read a Charles Dickens novel, or Dracula is the famous one we read on the Bookening. The women and the children are always portrayed as these virtuous kind of creatures to be beset by evil. And Carol Ann does definitely fulfill that function. But we're also going to have little things where she's a kid. Can I get a goldfish now?
Yeah.
We want to have our cake and eat it too. And that's kind of what, when we say the it of this movie is special, it's, you feel that longing that Spielberg has,
that tension of, you want this to feel like a 50s family, and it's not. And he's just rubbing your nose in that.
And as if all that wasn't Freudian or Jungian enough, the dad's name is Stephen. I mean, like...
I
only noticed it because I had the subtitles on. Carol Ann, we hear her stupid name all the... Carol Ann, all the time. That's her name. But we have this dad named Stephen, and he's this schlubby guy who's pretending to be a man. And, the key scene in the movie is that scene where they're just goofing off and smoking pot and acting much younger than
they deserve to be.
They deserve to be.
Runs over to the mirror and does his thing, and you don't know if he's actually going to do a high dive, jackknife, something or other off the thing. And what a dorky thing that he jackknifes into the pool when he's going to look for Carol Ann.
Yeah. Yep. It's all set up and payoff, Jake.
That was pretty cheap.
Yeah, no, that was cheap. But I don't know. This is what I think makes the movie interesting, is just this. I don't know. I wonder how much of it was conscious and how much of it was just what Spielberg writing. I mean, he feels like a very intuitive guy. If nothing else about Steven Spielberg, I think you can say he's an intuitive guy. I'm sure a lot of it wasn't conscious, but he's got screenplay credit, by the way. This is one of the only things that actually has Steven Spielberg's name on the screenplay. Mm-hmm. So there's another reason to give him lots of agency in this story. Mm-hmm. But I just find that fascinating that you're going to have this dad play acting the whole time, and then it's going to culminate with, tell her you're going to spank her. I would never do that. Tell her, assume the mantle of old school fatherhood right now at the very last moment.
You've got to get her to do it. And so you have to actually be a dad.
Right. He does it.
And it works.
Except for that Spielberg's not really going to give it to him, because we're going to have a false ending. Fatherhood has come through. He stepped up to the plate. He was a dad. Motherhood has come through. She's gone in and got her daughter and come out of the upside down, or whatever they call it in this thing. Don't worry, folks. We'll talk about Stranger Things. I got some things to say about Stranger Things as it relates to this movie. Mm-hmm. But
hey, what if we based the whole series on what was on the other side of Poltergeist?
What if we did it with slightly better but much less charming special effects and missed the entire thing that actually made the movie interesting? I guess that's basically what I want to say about Stranger Things, but we'll say it at greater length later.
We can bring Walter and Gary.
Yeah, exactly. Walter and Gary. They should have their own review show. Motherhood and fatherhood are going to win. We're going to pat ourselves on the back. We're going to smile. We're going to be a happy family. And then just let's blow that to bits. Let's have our family impotently flailing around as the monsters come back and wreak havoc.
Dad's got to come back.
Not really to save the day, but just to
yell at the guy. You knew it. You did it. You moved the cemetery, but you didn't move the graves.
Right.
You moved the headstones, but you didn't move the bodies, didn't you?
While his family...
We got to put a button on what's actually going on here.
Oh, that's what happens.
Oh, okay.
That's why we had that useless scene with the boss talking about relocating the cemetery earlier.
Meanwhile, his family's like, he has to stop to say that while his family's like,
Yeah, being assaulted by supernatural forces and all that sort of thing. And then they're gonna all climb into the car. He's gonna fumble with the keys so we can draw out the suspense as long as possible while corpses go flying. And then they're gonna get away, and they're just gonna be dejected and
end up in a hotel and throw the TV out.
In a Holiday Inn where we throw the TV out. And I think these filmmakers are enough born out of the liberal kind of neo-Marxian ethos that informs so much of our culture now, that throwing the TV out is I don't think it's intuitive. I think it's like 80s culture sucks. Like, let's down with capitalism, down with the man, down with everything, down with America. It's all built on a bed of lies.
Your greedy, corner cutting, make the buck mentality is going to awaken primal forces of nature that are going to upend everything from the foundations. The foundations are built on the cemetery, on the graves of the people that you've trampled and trounced, and they're all going to come back to haunt you.
Yep. And all that schlubby dad Stephen can do is observe his family being torn apart and kind of maybe buy them some time. Yay! That's the end of the movie. On that level, I almost recommend this movie. I mean, it's not really worth watching as a movie.
It's only worth watching as an artifact.
As an artifact, it's pretty fascinating. And if you want to, I guess let's just talk about Stranger Things. If you want to understand what's wrong with Stranger Things, I think this movie is a good argument or a good presentation of what Stranger Things actually doesn't do, which in a phrase is have something to say, really. I mean, like...
Yeah. Well, it's the only thing that you can do. Like, in a downstream from that, all we had up until now is decadence.
Mm-hmm.
There's been no adversity or cultural adversity, just a slide into decadence until 2020.
Until 2020, yeah.
Or I guess some would argue until 2016. The closest thing we've got is 2001.
Right.
Right. But that was an external enemy. It wasn't an internal battle that was being fought. And so all you can do is sort of like, it's
not much. I mean,
there's not much you can do. You can just sort of like live in the afterglow, right? Stranger Things, 80s Amblin was potent for a reason. And all Stranger Things can do is be masturbatory.
Yeah, I think that's true.
In the wake of all of that.
Well, I think Poltergeist, for all of its flaws, it carries with it cultural weight that comes from actually having been made in 1982. Maybe it's intentional, maybe it's not. But what I think of so much of 80s nostalgia, which hopefully is past us at this point, minus the additional seasons of Stranger Things. Is it?
I think so. I think we're well into the 90s now.
What 80s nostalgia tends to do is just celebrate the decadence of the 80s. Just like, actually, that was what it really says is that was a more innocent kind of decadence and wasn't that nice. Early MTV, Cyndi Lauper, Michael Jackson, businessmen doing coke. Like, that all kind of has a sheen of respectability compared to the turgid, annoying decadence that we put up with now.
Right.
That's kind of what 80s nostalgia says. But I don't know. I mean, just to go back to the 50s and 80s thing, I think a real 80s movie carries with it the accumulated weight of the 70s, the 60s, the 50s, you know.
And has World War II still firmly in the mirror.
Right. Here's a dad that was definitely spanked by his dad, the World War II veteran.
Who landed at D-Day.
Yeah.
You know, like...
And he doesn't want to spank his kid, and that's actually going to get him into trouble because he... You know, if Stranger Things was smart, that's what they would do with the character of Hopper and with the character of Winona Ryder and stuff. Here are people whose parents believed in men and women and stuff like that. You know, the character, the mom in Poltergeist, like, she is just the housewife. We don't feel the need like a modern movie. She's actually a designer who stays at home and does all the mom stuff.
We don't feel any of that.
No, she's just the mom. Hopper in Stranger Things, the real Hopper, you know, that kind of guy, he doesn't think that women should be in the workforce. Like,
right.
He carries the accumulated weight of the 1950s. He was, you know, there are people that gave themselves to the things in the 60s, but that's actually not that. We're telling the story of small town Indiana. Those people are conservative. And so it's like when Winona Ryder goes to the store and she says, "You're going to give me my time off." I've only ever seen the first season of Stranger Things. You know, and you're going to give me a pack of cigarettes and stuff. The show accepts that that's just what a character would do. I'm not saying that she shouldn't do it, but it has to come with the weight of, oh, she's being really weird. Like, a woman wouldn't actually think to do that. I think Joyce is her name. Is Joyce the Winona Ryder?
I don't remember.
Like, she came out of a different cultural idea of women. Like, she actually thinks of herself first as I don't know. All I'm saying is the show only understands the 80s as set dressing. It doesn't understand the muscles and the skeletal structure and everything that would actually be undergirding the entire philosophy of life that those people would bring to it. Sheriff Hopper is the kind of man who would be...
Which, again, is what Back to the Future did with the 50s.
Yeah.
This is, even then, there's a way to do that.
Yeah. Back to the Future is a movie with a thesis statement, and that thesis is we were always decadent, basically, and we were always great. Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, it's a weird movie. I think one of the reasons that the ending of that movie doesn't quite land is, for me at least, like, once Marty gets back, is because it is such a weird thesis statement, actually. Like, yay, now you're rich. You know, it's not quite It's a Wonderful Life. It wants to be, and it has a little bit of that feeling of like we set everything right.
Yeah.
But there's something that's cynical about, yay, now you have a giant, nice Jeep, whatever it is that he has,
Yep.
Now you're definitely going to be able to sleep with your girl this weekend.
Yeah. Now instead of Biff being your dad being Biff's
boss,
now instead of, Biff being your dad's boss, your dad is Biff's boss.
Right. We haven't actually achieved any kind of...
All because of one swing.
Right. There's something that kind of works about it. Like George McFly actually found his manhood, basically.
Yeah.
Basically. And that resonates, I think, for anybody. But what doesn't quite resonate, or at least has some weird mixed messaging, is you find your manhood and therefore... you're rich. Therefore, you achieve 80s style Reagan success. I mean, it kind of works, I guess. I'm not. We should do Back to the Future sometime. It'd be a fun movie to talk about.
Yeah.
But it's just a good example of having something to say. If you're going to make a movie about the 80s, you have to have something to say about the 50s. Stranger Things doesn't have anything to say about the 20th century. All it has to do is say, here's some characters. They're just like us, and they happen to exist with the set dressing.
And don't you love that set dressing? Because we do. Yeah.
And insofar as we love it, we love it. I mean, I can watch Stranger Things and be a little nostalgic. I like the synth score. I like some of the trappings. Whatever, it's fine. But there is something hollow about it. And there's something that doesn't quite ring true to my childhood and to my memory of growing up in that era, in the same way that like Poltergeist can actually make me nostalgic. Like I grew up with those toys, and my parents behaved in a way that's not entirely dissimilar to that.
By the way, I mean, I think you can listen to this and say, well, who can actually go back and do that sort of thing?
Mm-hmm.
Can it be done? Like, okay. But I think the answer is, yeah, of course it can be done. Have you ever heard of a show called Mad Men? Like Mad Men goes back and explores the 50s and the 60s and the 70s.
And Mad Men does such a great job that, like, I got done watching that show, and it's not a show that I necessarily recommend, but I did watch it. It's got a lot of sex in it. I understand my grandpa. I understand the emotional dead center of Don Draper and the attendant neediness and debauchery that comes with that. It's not that my grandpa was debauched or anything, but I felt like
it, right?
I suddenly understood that generation. I understood the generation that came before, what they were coming out of, what they were moving into.
Well, and they'd done their work to understand it and to at least present a vision of it or a perspective on it that was like, hey, we're going to explain the world you live in today, your grandparents or your parents or, your childhood or however you fit into that demographically. We're going to explain it to you.
Yeah.
We're going to put you there. We're going to relive it.
Right.
The way that it was, the way we think it was.
Yeah.
And it's compelling because it feels like they nailed it,
Yeah.
And that's the reason why, I mean, Stranger Things just doesn't have anything to say.
There is no...
I watched the first 2 seasons of Stranger Things, but what they did in season 2 made me quit. I hated it.
The mistakes that they make, like, spoiler alert, killing off Samwise Gamgee and stuff like that.
And the way they did it.
And it's from the very first episode where they kill off that chef who's so nice in season 1. Those guys are always tasteless and they're always muddling their messaging. And I think it comes down to the fact that they really don't have a unified theory of who these people are and why these people are. I mean, if they had that, then they wouldn't actually kill Samwise Gamgee because they would believe in him, or they'd give him some dignity in death. All the problems of that show flow out of the fact that they don't have something to say.
Yeah.
And
so it's just like, oh, we stumbled into creating something cool. Wouldn't it be funny to kill him in the most gruesome way possible and just linger there and degrade him in front of you? No.
Not really. That's the Poltergeist mirror scene all over again. Like, let's just do something gruesome for...
No, that's not... It's just not good. You still have to tell a good story. It doesn't matter what genre you're in.
Yep.
You have to tell a good story with likable characters. Period. That's it. And okay, like, you can keep riffing, but at the end of the day, what you've created, it may have been a cultural phenomenon, but it's not going to last. It's not going to stand up. Nobody's going to go back to Stranger Things after Stranger Things is done.
I've said this from the very beginning. It's lost. It had a fun hook for its first season, and
they've got nowhere to go with it.
And they've got nowhere to go with it, and they never did, and they don't have anything to say, and they've got a lot of nice actors, and
yeah, they've got
those kids are really talented. There's a lot of small pleasures that you get from watching Stranger Things. I don't want to begrudge anyone Stranger Things or their enjoyment of it, as much as I've spent many episodes of many podcasts doing just that.
Yeah.
Whatever, if you like it, that's fine. But realize that it's junk food.
And it's not even the kind of, it's not
good junk food.
Yeah, there's not much redemptive about this junk food. Like, you could say that Steven Spielberg's junk food, and you'd not be wrong. It's just popcorn. But
here's a Poltergeist, a bad movie with chintzy special effects and nobody having any kind of coherent vision for it. And Steven Spielberg accidentally had a lot of things that are very interesting to observe because he's just that good an observer of human nature and of human beings and his own culture. And he obviously has a take on it. He has something that he believes.
I mean, it was an outlet, right? It was an outlet for processing his junk.
Yeah. And then the good statements are, yeah, you could probably argue if you wanted to, you can't tell a fairy tale like E.T. without having some kind of a dumping ground like Poltergeist to just get it out of your system. Like, actually, Elliot's trash, and so is Elliot's mom, and it's all going to burn, but let's just get that out of our system so we can do E.T., where a boy and his dog transcend time and space to find the magic of love and
life.
And it makes perfect sense, and everybody loves it, and everybody cries. I mean, it is... I actually like the first act because it just has enough of those things that I was already sort of keyed into that I liked it. I mean, even the cheesy shots of all the tract houses, the identikit houses with like the
kids are going to trip up the dude in the race car. And
exactly. But then those cheesy shots of the clouds matted. There's a couple times where it's like ominous clouds gathering over small town USA.
Yeah.
I liked that stuff. Where the movie really drags for me is the middle act when you've got all this new age mumbo jumbo and the lady explaining about sometimes we don't find it to the light and all this kind of stuff. And I think there should just be a rule for all scary movies or movies of any type, really. Unless you're a Ghostbuster, you should not try and combine science with paranormal phenomenon, because it just comes across like exactly like it is bad science and bad paranormal phenomenon. Like,
yeah, unless you're going to camp it up and be super tongue in cheek.
Yeah. The reason Ghostbusters works is because Bill Murray's there and he doesn't believe a second of it.
Yeah.
And he hates it all. And
that's funny.
And he's there to just be Groucho Marx. And I mean, Bill Murray in that point of his career is borderline angry. I mean, he's like what we were talking about Spielberg, the id of what he was getting out of his system with Poltergeist. Bill Murray's the same way. He hates everybody. He hates everything. He hates the fact that he's a star. He hates the fact that people are paying money for this stuff. And because he's Bill Murray, he's very charming about it and can get away with it for whatever reason. Bill Murray he can get away with it. But yeah, without Bill Murray there to say, why are we doing this, is really corny to have the little people keep talking about the biolometer and the...
Well, I just imagine Dan Aykroyd saying anything without Bill Murray there to counterbalance him. The fact is, Dan Aykroyd is a believer. He actually believes all that stuff.
The reason he is in charge of Crystal Skull vodka is because he believes in the artifacts known as crystal skulls. Like
literally.
He's
wacko.
Well, and famously, the first script of Ghostbusters was like this 300-page, like, set in the apocalyptic future when all the spirits of Dan Aykroyd is a crazy person.
He's a wacko crazy person.
Right. That movie works because it puts his crazy energy up against the cynical, unbelieving energy of Bill Murray.
And Bill Murray can overpower it, even though Dan Aykroyd is in charge of the script and everything else about that movie.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it works.
Yep.
It cannot work outside of that dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got, the dorky white guy and the cool black guy. They're caught in the middle of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Harold Ramis just plays somebody who's too nerdy and out of it to even care about the battle between a believer and a non-believer going on all the time.
Yep.
And then the black guy's just there to
collect his check and do his job and be cool.
It works.
It works. There's some other magic going on. It's Sigourney Weaver, and then
Rick Moranis is always...
Rick Moranis is awesome.
He's just one of those good luck charms. Like there's...
Yeah, and then Annie Potts or whatever her name is.
Yeah, she's great.
Like that, what a great addition to that cast. Like, let's take Annie Potts and let's make her play, this like dorky Janine secretary person. Like,
what's weird about Ghostbusters, which I think was 86, so a few years after this, that movie...
You don't think it was 84?
No, you're right. It was 84. I guess I'll double check, but I think you're right.
I'm pretty sure it was 84.
Yep. Yeah, well, we've multiple times looked up the movies that were
our birth years.
And
that's my birth year.
84. You're right. So Ghostbusters is 2 years. Ghostbusters, I think, I don't find Ghostbusters to be all that scary or anything, but in terms of actually evoking some kind of feeling of there are forces on the other side of
the veil.
Yeah, the veil that are trying to get out. Ghostbusters is pretty effective.
Yeah.
You don't want those demons to make it through, and they are smart enough until the final joke that everybody loves of the movie. They're smart enough to play all the scary stuff really straight. I mean, Bill Murray's always mocking it, but in and of itself, it's not funny. It's scary.
Yeah.
And I'd say Ghostbusters has a few moments that are actually more eerie than anything. And
Slimer just sitting there gobbling the food.
Yeah, well, exactly.
And then charging a frozen Bill Murray.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It sent chills down my spine as a kid.
Well, that's another movie that I guess we'll have to maybe talk about one of these days.
Librarian chick early on.
Yeah, no, that is pretty creepy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess it's worth maybe saying Poltergeist is one of those famously cursed movies. There's a lot of lore and urban legends about the...
Oh, really?
Well, so Carol Ann died weirdly. She was in Poltergeist 2 and then Poltergeist 3. And then when she was 12 years old, she went into cardiac arrest or something like that. And just one of those things, like this beautiful little child just died. I think it was kind of morbid. Like they had to finish Poltergeist 3 without her or something like that. And so the movie kind of bears the traces of, oh shoot, we have to rethink this because we lost Carol Ann. I've never seen any of the Poltergeist sequels, and somehow I don't feel that inspired to check them out. As wonderful as the Jaws sequels were, and all sequels to Spielberg movies not made by Spielberg.
Never saw the Jaws sequels. I haven't seen any of the Jurassic Park sequels, except for the Jurassic World series.
Well, there you go. Well, maybe we'll have to talk about those one of those days. Those are kind of interesting Spielberg movies.
I've only seen Jurassic Park.
Yep.
I've seen the Jurassic World stuff with Pratt.
Pratt and Howard. The girl that plays the teenage daughter also, who by the way is like 10 years younger than Mom in real life, the actress, Jo Beth Williams, they're really close in age, which I think is intentional. Like I think whether it was intuitive or not, I think he really, really wanted the parents to feel really young and in Mom's case, kind of pretty sexually viable, whatever the nice way of saying that. He wanted her to feel like
the construction workers could hit on daughter and mom.
Exactly. Yeah.
And mom can be proud of daughter flipping them off.
Yeah. Well, as Spielberg, I forget whether I said this earlier, Spielberg has said his dad left, he hated his dad, and his mom was his best friend. And she never felt like much of a mom, but she did feel like a best friend. And so you can definitely see the DNA of that in E.T. and in this. It really feels like he's processing in both those movies his own parents as much as anything. But the teenage daughter died as well. She broke up with her boyfriend, and then her boyfriend stabbed her to death or something like that.
Whoa.
So, yeah, a couple of people... To be clear, folks, Nathan Alberson does not endorse the idea of a poltergeist curse, but I just thought it was interesting trivia. I think anytime I'm like, probably lots of, Free Willy, 2 crew members died and nobody cared, but a movie called Poltergeist,
right,
about these kinds of things, and then anything weird happens, everybody wants to say the poltergeist curse.
Yeah, no doubt lots of weird things have happened during production of any number of Shakespeare plays because they've been produced a million times, but there is one play that's the Scottish play. Happens to be pretty dark and
has some witches
and stuff in it, and so if there's some lore that's going to be attached to it, it's going a Shakespeare play is going to be attached to Macbeth.
Yeah, exactly. By the way, this movie should have been called Haunting, right?
Yeah.
Given the definitions that they laid down, this is not a poltergeist.
No, but the reason... So there was a mixing... See, I think the reason, this house is cleansed...
We actually got rid of the poltergeist?
We got rid of the ghosts, but we didn't get rid of the poltergeist.
Okay. So the poltergeist is just going to throw all the corpses up at them at the end.
Or maybe vice versa.
Or vice versa, yeah. So it's like a twist. Like you thought it was a poltergeist, but really it was a ghost, or you got rid of the ghost.
Doesn't that monster show up again though? In that?
Yeah, I couldn't tell whether it was two different monsters. There's a monster that comes out and goes brah at the dad.
Yeah.
When he's holding the rope and the mom's going in to get Carol Ann.
Yeah. Does that monster come back?
It looks different to me. A monster. There's a skeletal kind of crawling creature that when they're being sucked into when the mom's taking the bath and then the two kids start getting...
Yeah, there's a monster.
Yeah, there is a monster. That's right.
So that's the poltergeist.
That's the poltergeist.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're all caught in space between.
Right. Okay.
And there's a convergence. And
it all tracks.
Yeah, it all sort of. But yeah, they're all caught like this house is a convergence and maybe the poltergeist has been attracted to it.
Mm-hmm.
Also, these spirits of unrest are there too. And we see all these cowboys and crap.
There you go.
Who knows?
So many ways this screenplay could have been rewritten to make more sense and be more scary. Or
somebody's figured it out and thought it through better than us. But
the
fact that we just had this discussion of being a little confused about which is which. I mean, come on.
Yeah, they're not.
They're not trying very hard to be clear. If we can't just come away knowing it.
Yeah.
The one thing we do know is that jerk. He moved the headstones, but not the graves.
Mm-hmm. We do know that because it was said to us
several times.
It was screamed to us, in fact. I guess maybe one other thing I'll say is this is just part of the 70s horror boom, 70s into the 80s boom that started with the success of Stephen King and
John Carpenter
and the novel version and then the film version of Rosemary's Baby. Big bestseller, popular movie. Publishers realized, we can publish horror books. And then Stephen King hit the scene around that time with Carrie in the early 70s, I think 72. And V.C. Andrews, who I've never read and know nothing about, but I've seen a million V.C. Andrews paperbacks just sitting in the store in my time. What's vaguely interesting maybe is that Poltergeist is part of a movement to bring the supernatural together with the mundane. This doesn't, you watch an old Universal 1930s Dracula movie, it's like creaky castles and cobwebs and very gothic trappings and stuff like that.
Well, let's just say that's a springboard for a little tiny rant that I think is worth going out on. If you've heard Christians today talk about, what we really need is like Narnia, but set in the Midwest. Guys, do you know what Narnia set in the Midwest is? It's the MCU. It's...
Yep.
Oh, we need stories and a mythos for like America. That's like...
Yeah, we've got them.
We've got them.
Yep.
We have them. Like, that's what Stephen King was doing. That's what Ray Bradbury was doing. That's what Spielberg was doing. That's why these guys were That's what Hollywood has been doing. Has been like everything from Broadway to John Wayne to Spielberg to Stephen King they've been creating the American mythos for us, or trying to.
You don't have to like what they do, but
don't pretend like
let's not pretend like they didn't do it.
Exactly. You can say they did it bad, and that we need a Christian myth making or whatever.
You don't have to pretend like you don't have to like the fact that Homer had Odysseus fornicate all the time, but you can at least admit that Homer wrote the myth that informed the culture.
Exactly. So, anyhow,
yeah, I think that's really true.
I mean, Christians are so dumb.
They're just always 20 years behind the times.
Always 20 years behind. Always 20 years behind in how they process everything. And always thinking they've got a corner on things, finally. And it's just like, go back and pay attention to what's going on in the world around you. Wake up. Wake up.
Yeah, what's the next thing that we need, actually? Not the thing that's doing the thing that Stephen King, who's now in his 70s, figured out how to do.
Yeah.
And Steven Spielberg, who's now in his 70s, figured out how to do. What's the next thing?
C.S. Lewis, who's been in the grave for 40 years, figured out how to do.
Yeah.
Let's do the next thing.
Let's do the next thing. That's
the thing. So long as Christians just are always trying to be that, trying to live up to, trying to be the next big thing, they're always going to be riffing off of 20, 30 years ago, and they're never going to be ready for the next best thing.
Well, the other weird thing that Christians do is they don't riff off of 20 years ago. They riff off of 100 years ago.
Right.
Like if Stephen King and Steven Spielberg already decided, like, actually, we don't need creaky castles. It's scarier if we're just in our normal suburban house and ghosts are haunting us. Christians are the kinds of people who think, ooh, you know what would be good is a story about a haunted castle.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's do Tolkien again.
Yeah.
It's like the MCU already figured out how to bring, and George Lucas and everybody, like, they took the Tolkien stuff and they made it, like, for us.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah, and you want the creepy castle stuff, but still in the suburban? Well, J.K. Rowling figured out how to do that too.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah.
You want a mashup? We've got everything.
Mm-hmm.
We've got Tolkien, but today we've got Tolkien in space, and we've got, Tolkien that's a mashup of old and today.
Right.
Like, take your pick. Harry Potter, Star Wars, MCU.
Mm-hmm.
You want it, we got it. But it doesn't live up to Tolkien because it's not Christian. Well, yeah, okay, sure, fine. Cool. You're right. But let's not pretend like it doesn't exist.
Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, here's just a bit of strategy. Like, if the world is occupying a space pretty well and pretty popularly, is that really the space that you want to try and take? Like, you could get in ahead on a different space and maybe really stake some ground, like Tolkien did.
Exactly.
Like John Milton did, like the great Christian fiction writers and people have done. But just saying, hey, that space looks cool.
Man, it just makes you the cheap version of Stranger Things.
Yeah. Let's not be Stranger Things. Don't be Stranger Things.
Don't be Stranger Things. Be better.
Be better. Hey, speaking of better, let's do our Patron Choice Award of Awesomeness for Jacqueline.
Yo, what's up, Jackie?
Jackie, you are awesome.
You're so awesome.
We really like you.
Yep.
We think you're great.
Jacqueline is the best.
Jacqueline is like, if we had to compare her to one Steven Spielberg movie, she would be either E.T. or Raiders of the Lost Ark, because she's perfect. She's practically perfect.
I'm going to go with Raiders of the Lost Ark, yeah.
Maybe on some days, like when she's feeling a little melancholy, she's E.T. When she's buoyant and
just cheerfully there
conquering the world,
get back up on her feet and conquer the world, she's Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
But she don't poltergeist, yo.
Nope.
All right. That's it. This show was produced by me, executive produced by Jake and me. We'll be back next time to talk about everybody's favorite Spielberg movie, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. A movie that arguably didn't happen because they ended this trilogy really nicely back with Last Crusade. So maybe we won't be back if that argument proves to be true. Anyway, folks, until next time,
they're here.